So this is also an opportunity for our families to participate in what our kids do every week, which is we're currently working through the curriculum of godly play. This is a way we incorporate stories and ask questions of the Bible and really teach these stories in the way that originally they were taught. They weren't taught written in a book. They were told from one person to another person to another person to another person. And then they got written down. And so we tell these stories out loud because that is part of the tradition that we come from. We have pieces that we look at and that the kids are invited to play with after, because this is as much their story as it is our story and as it was Abraham and Sarah's story. We are currently in the Old Testament, and so today we are going to be talking about Jacob. Before we start, we ring the bell. Can anybody tell me why we ring the bell and we listen? So we can listen well to the story. Why else do we practice ringing the bell and listening? Jojo and Ellie, why else do we practice ringing the bell and listening to the story, or listening for the ring? To get ready. And to be calm, and to not only listen to me talking, but listen to who else? Everyone listening. And who else do we listen for sometimes? That's really hard to hear. God. It's really hard to hear God. We don't always have a voice that tells us the right thing or the wrong thing. So we have to practice listening, because listening's hard. Adults can tell you that never changes. Sometimes listening is hard. And so, eyes on me, let's ring the bell. Ready? And we take a deep breath and we close our eyes and we listen for the bell to end. Some of us are really good listeners and last way longer than other of us, so I'm going to tell us when we're going to open our eyes and be ready for the story, okay? All right, ready? Take a deep breath in. All right, and we are ready for our story. So we met Abraham and Sarah, and Abraham and Sarah had a son named Isaac, and Isaac married Rebekah, and Isaac and Rebekah had no children for a very long time. And then they had twin boys, Esau and Jacob. And Esau and Jacob were twins, meaning they were born the same day, but they were pretty much as different could be. Jacob was light, or had dark hair, and didn't really like to go out hunting. He liked to stay by the tent and watch the sheep. Esau had red hair and was hairy all over and loved to go out hunting and exploring. I'm more of a Jacob. We like to stay inside. So Esau and Jacob each of their parents had a favorite, which isn't always the best, we know. But Rebekah loved Jacob, and Isaac loved Esau. So they had kind of a challenging siblingship. But Jacob thought it wasn't fair that Esau would inherit all of his father's things. Esau was born before Jacob, even though they were born the same day, and Jacob was mad that just because he was born a couple minutes early, he would get all of his father's things. So one day, Esau came home, and Jacob had made him a bowl of soup. Now, I have never personally experienced this, but I think if you're outdoors all day long, hunting and exploring, you're probably pretty hungry when you get home. So Jacob gave the bowl of soup, or showed the bowl of soup to Esau, and said, "I will trade you this bowl of soup for all of our father's things." And Esau was so hungry that he looked at that bowl of soup and said, "What good is our father's things when I'm so hungry right now?" So he took the soup, and that made a deal between the brothers. But that deal had to include their father. And so later, their father was sick and not feeling well. So he sent Esau out to hunt and to make his favorite stew, to bring back an animal to make his favorite stew. But Rebekah, who loved Jacob, wanted Jacob to inherit all the things. So Rebekah and Jacob, in a moment of selfishness, came up with a plan. Rebekah made stew out of the sheep that were nearby, and then they put furs of animals on Jacob because Isaac could not see very well. So when they presented the stew, Jacob brought the stew into his father Isaac. So that Isaac, who could not see, felt his son's arm and felt the hair and thought it was Esau, and said, "For the soup I will give you the blessing of all of the things of my inheritance." When Esau came back, he was angry because Jacob had tricked their father into giving his inheritance to his brother. Esau was so angry he threatened to kill his brother. And so Rebekah said, "Go to my family in a different land, find a wife, let Esau calm down, and then come back after your father dies." So Jacob agreed and set off through the desert towards Haran, where his mother's family lived. One night, Jacob laid his head on a rock and had a dream, and that dream had a ladder leading up to heaven where angels came up and down and God was all around, and God seemed to be everywhere. And a voice said, "I give you this land to bless the world, and I will always be with you." So when Jacob woke up, he poured out oil on the rock and blessed the place, and he named the place Bethel, or the house of God. Jacob continued to travel, and he came to a well where he saw a woman, and he fell in love with this woman. Her name was Rachel. So Jacob offered to work for Rachel's father for 7 years to marry Rachel for his permission. And so after 7 years, there was a wedding. But in those days, the women covered their face. And because Laban had 2 daughters, he tricked Jacob into marrying Leah. And so Jacob was distraught, but he decided to work for 7 more years to marry Rachel, as it was a custom in those days to have more than one wife. So he worked for another 7 years and married Rachel. And then one night, Jacob decided to come back. Jacob was afraid to meet his brother again, to come back to his homeland, since Esau had threatened to kill him. And apparently Esau was coming with 400 men. So instead, Jacob sent his family across the river and was left alone. While he was left alone that night, he met a stranger. And he wrestled with the stranger all night long. And he said, "I will not let go until you bless me." At the end of the night, he was blessed. The stranger said, now you will be called Israel, for you have wrestled with God and with man, and you have prevailed." But Jacob was not left unchanged by this experience. He was left with a limp, forever changed, forever made to walk slower, to really think about his movements going forward. And so Jacob decided to catch up with his family and go in front of them to meet Esau. He was surprised when Esau came near. He bowed down, and Esau ran to him and put his arms around him. Jacob, or Israel, as he was now called, then had a daughter named Dinah. And then he had 12 sons, each of which would become a tribe of Israel, each of which would own land and spread out, each of which who would have their own stories. And these 12 sons became part of the great family. This is the story of Jacob. Now, we ask wondering questions. Wondering questions are special because they don't have an answer that I know. We ask wondering questions because sometimes we look at the Bible and read these stories and we don't have answers. We can talk about them, we can think about them. Lots of my classmates write really long papers about them, but it doesn't change the fact that we don't know the answer. So we ask wondering questions, starting with our kids, so that they know, no matter what, they can learn things about these stories, no matter what season they're in. So our first wondering question is, I wonder what part of the story you like best. When Jacob and Esau reunite. Took a long time. This is my favorite part of the story. When Jacob wrestled a stranger, because it was the first time I learned you could be angry with God and you could wrestle with God. And it doesn't mean you always walk away unchanged. Any other favorite parts? Yeah. By hair. Yeah. Me and Pastor Mike were talking about Isaac this morning, how he's this strange character that really we only know for 3 things. At first, there's this hard story about how his father potentially sacrificed him. And then he marries Rebecca, kind of out of this has to situation. And then he gets tricked. And that's the story of Isaac. And so this life of Isaac that connects some of these great stories is one that we don't know that much about. Yeah.
I relate to the temptation of the
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. What we will do sometimes. It's why we don't go shopping hungry. Because you will buy the grocery store. I wonder which part of the story is most important. We don't ask this question because there is one part that's most important, because that changes. Sometimes this part's most important. Sometimes Leah's story is most important to me. So I wonder today, which part is most important to you? Jojo, do you have a most important part? No, that's okay. Sometimes we have most important parts that feel too hard to share that day, or sometimes. And we can just think about them. And maybe the next time we come back around to this story, we'll be able to talk about that part. The next one is, I wonder where you are in the story, or what part is about you. This is different than what's most important, because what's most important sometimes can be separate from you, and sometimes a part is more about you today. I have really weird dreams sometimes, so this feels like 2 nights ago I had some really weird dreams. So seeing a lot of angels coming up and down feels a little bit about me. I'm like in the dream. Sometimes we have lots to say, sometimes we don't. This is what happens downstairs, too. All right, this is always a fun one. I wonder what part of the story we could leave out and still have all we need. We ask this question because the Bible becomes this untouchable thing to us sometimes. It becomes very separated from us. So we ask because we're invited to have creativity. We're invited to be people who interact with this story. So we ask what part we can leave out to invite our kids into the Bible. What part can you leave out and still have all we need? Which one?
Wrestling.
The wrestling with the stranger? Oh, you're taking away one of my favorite parts, Lena. What part, Johnny?
Well, I'm just gonna say I want to debate.
Oh, you went, go for it. We can talk about. Sometimes I debate with the kids. I'm like, what would happen if we like to follow that trail?
My favorite part of the story.
So what would happen if we left this part out?
He would not be called Israel.
He would not be called Israel. He would not have a limp. What other part could we leave out? I think a lot of people like to leave out Leah. And then you don't have that many tribes, right? Yes?
I think you talked about when Jacob paid the stew for the inheritance.
Because then he did it again. He doubled down on it. Yeah. Garrett, what part can you leave out? Do you want to tell mom and mom can tell me? Or dad? Sometimes our brain, we have something and then it goes away. That happens to me so much.
It's not really clear what the dream is about.
Yeah? The dream?
So I don't know how it really fits into the whole story.
Yeah. What's interesting is as we tell these stories, there's parts that stick out to me now as we go through the Old Testament, because as we talked about Abraham and Sarah way back here, Abraham and Sarah's story was to go from place to place to place to place and learn that God was everywhere with them. And at each place they built an altar to God. And so 2 generations down, Jacob meets God again and marks the place that he meets God as Bethel. So sometimes it's these links that we start to see through the Bible. All right, so that is our story of Jacob. And now what we do is respond. We are called to be creative people. Whether you think you're creative or not, you're creative. That's how God made us. And so we have things up front that you are going to choose. We have air drying clay, so if you want to make something and keep it, we can do that. We have Play-Doh. If you just want to make something and then smush it up, you do that. We have pencils, markers, crayons, and papers. If you want to color something, we have the words of our confession that we are working on. So I would invite you all to come and pick something to do your work. And this is a part that's up to you. How are you going to respond to what you heard today? Are you going to make an image of your favorite part? Are you going to just think through the story while you're playing with Play-Doh? So I invite you all to start and come up and pick what you want to do. Clay. And then there's trays as well. And we're going to do this for about 10 minutes.